Welcome, 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 New Englanders and public education advocates. We are so thrilled that you are here with us. If you are just popping on, I invite you to head to that Padlet QR code. The link is in the chat, and I will put it again a few times so that you have it. Tell us what education justice means to you. A copy of this recording will head out to everyone. So if you know someone who is missing it, don't worry, we've got you covered. We will send that out, as well as a copy of some of the most pertinent points that we discussed tonight. My name is Tracy Nance, and I am the 2020 and 2021 Georgia Teacher of the Year. During my tenure as Teacher of the Year, I started seeing lots and lots of just bad policies in public education coming down the drain and beginning to take effect. And as a result, my classroom is currently in a storage unit, and I have lent myself to advocating for kids. And here with us tonight, we have three extraordinary New England State Teachers of the Year to talk with you more about what's happening in your region of our country. I want to tell you a little bit about what it is we believe and why we feel it's so important that we're here this evening, and why we've invited you to come to connect, to learn with us, and to advocate. So what we believe that every child, regardless of their background, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their zip code, they deserve the right and all of the supports that come with it that are needed to succeed in the classroom and to feel safe and supported, period. That is always our goal. And truly, that is what New Englanders want for their kids. We've seen that time and time again. But with all of these bad policies that are happening, that gets really muddied. As you listen and advocate with us this evening, I want you to really think about what your own talents are. Maybe you are a speaker. Maybe you're an artist. Maybe you are a social media guru. Doesn't matter what it is, I want you to think about what your talent is and how you might lend that to the service of advocating for our students. This evening, after I finish talking with you, we are going to pass it over to Deshawn Washington, Heidi Crumrine, and Kate McCann to talk to you more about what actually is education justice. As I said, that term has gotten pretty muddied out there, with accusations of being woke and all that nonstop, really taking our messaging and trying to paint it in a negative light. And we want to tell you that it's just not true. We're here to support and welcome all children, regardless of their background. We'll talk to you about the current education landscape in New England, and then we will go through some very specific guidelines around each state. We are going to share with you links to many coalitions in each state, as well as share with you different pieces of legislation that you should be on the lookout for. And before I pass it off, I'm going to tell you that those talents I told you to think about, that is the power of coalition. When we all come together, when we combine those talents, magic happens. Here in Georgia this past year, we defeated every single bad education bill there was, except for vouchers. But even that, we got incredible guardrails put on it. So I invite you to learn with us. I invite you to connect with one another in the chat, ask questions, and at the end, we will give you a chance to come off mute if you would like and speak with our panelists. With that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Kate McCann. Kate.
Good evening and welcome. I am Kate McCann. I'm the 2017 Vermont State Teacher of the Year. I currently teach AP Statistics and other math support classes at U32 High School in Montpelier, Vermont. I'm adjunct faculty at Norwich, and where I'm teaching elementary mathematics to aspiring educators. And I serve in the Vermont legislature as a state representative for Montpelier. And I'm here to welcome you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deshawn Washington. I am the 2024 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, 2025 Massachusetts Representative for the Teacher Excellence Award through the NEA, founder and president of Cultivating Changemakers, is an LLC that supports classroom teachers as well as any other adult with supporting them with building authentic relationships with their students that lead to academic achievement levels. I'm also a fourth grade teacher in Lexington Public Schools. That's about 25 minutes north of Boston. A doctoral student at Vanderbilt University. I'm in my last semester, so we're defending that thing in April, and hopefully we got a party that we're gonna have in April. And then beyond all of that, I am an ambassador of public education. I love this work that we're able to do, to be able to stand for justice and stand for equity and stand for access, stand for righteousness when it comes to this work. I'm hoping that tonight inspires you to think about getting involved in the work of education. More than that, I hope that tonight gives you the sense of urgency to know that what you're doing, you're already doing great work, and encouraging you to step forward and continuing that work for our students and for this great profession that we call to serve. So thank you for having me tonight.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Heidi Crumrine, and I'm the 2018 New Hampshire Teacher of the Year. I am an English teacher and literacy coach at Concord High School in Concord, New Hampshire, where I've been since 2004. I've also fallen into advocacy as a result of becoming Teacher of the Year. And so it started through, I'm an author, and I have published a book, 50 Strategies for Motivating Reluctant Readers. I write a variety of columns, normally about issues in education, for a variety of local and regional news media outlets. And I'm also the vice president of the executive board of Reaching Higher New Hampshire, which is a partisan nonprofit advocacy group in New Hampshire that seeks to elevate public schools and to provide unbiased resources for legislators, public schools, and anyone interested. And I would just like to echo what Deshawn says too. I think sometimes as teachers, when we see the negative press, when we see the horrible policy that makes the news that is being proposed in our states, or even in other states, we feel helpless, or we think no one is listening to me, or nobody cares. And the reality is that most of us believe very similarly, that and that we know what is best for our schools and our students and our classrooms, and that our voices can be very powerful, especially when we use them together. And that I think our young people are watching too. And when they see their teachers speaking truth to power, and they see their teachers standing up for what they believe in, that it empowers them as they move forward in their lives too. So thanks for being here tonight.
Awesome. And now having that opportunity to talk about why we're here, it's all really centered on this really one big question about what is education justice. And when I think about this term, it really helps us to really think about this concept of inspiring, motivating, encouraging students to be critical thinkers, to be able to be knowledge seekers, and to critique the learning that they've done in our classroom space, to go out into the world and apply the knowledge that they learn in their spaces in order to be upstanding citizens, citizens who are well informed, and citizens who are able to stand for righteousness and justice, not just in education, but in anything that they feel passionate about in life. And that really goes into Monica Washington's quote here. She's the 2014, excuse me, Texas Teacher of the Year. And she states the following: an educator's role is never to tell students what to believe, but here it is, to inspire students to want to know more. See, we're called to be able to equip our students to engage in great books and reading, and do phenomenal research in our science classes, and be critical thinkers in math, in order to incorporate this idea of inspiration, that those kids could take that learning from the classroom space back to their homes or back to the community spaces. Educators should always teach students how to find the truth and how to use that truth to become better citizens. It's an obligation, a duty, a responsibility of public education as educators ourselves to expose students to the truth of their history, the truth of our history as Americans, and the truth of where that truth will lead moving forward in this work that we're called to do together. So as we continue on this journey tonight, I want you to think about the truths that you'll be hearing from the rest of these slides, and think about how these truths will help to inform the practice that we get to do together moving forward. So I'm looking forward to sharing that truth, and our team share the truth with you, and also be able to encourage you forward to share that truth with our students.
A student affirming education creates a welcoming environment for all children, regardless of race, gender, family structure, income, ability, all of it. Such an education sees each student as an individual with both great potential and a unique perspective that positively contributes to the classroom's learning and community. A student affirming education teaches honest history and respects students' ability to think, to problem solve, and to form their own opinions. In this kind of responsive classroom, students see their own as well as others' backgrounds, experiences, and identities reflected in both history lessons and other curricular materials.
Heidi, you're on mute. It wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't do that
Darn
wrong.
it, sorry. But what is important to think about when we talk about what does it mean to pursue justice and what is a student affirming education? First of all, we all know that we've been doing this for years. This is why we became educators, and it's what we do every day when we walk into the classroom. But that it is student centered. We're focusing on the needs of what our students need, either what they're showing us that they need or what we are identifying that they need, that it's inquiry driven and that it affirms all backgrounds. This isn't political, this is our job. And frankly, if someone accuses me of being political in doing those three things, then I welcome the compliment, because that is what I am here to do. And I would be doing a disservice to my students if I was not considering those things. And now I'll go off mute on mute.
The teammates set me up well. So what does this look like in the classroom? This concept of student affirming education, justice, equity. What does that look like? We got some pictures here. We're going to go left to right and really break this down. On the left-hand side, you see a collage of students, my fourth grade students, reading to first grade students, engaging with them in text and teaching them how to read and sharing the exploration of reading awesome books that's student affirming, that's identity driven, that's equity driven, and also opportunity for community building to take place. It means in the middle that students are able to see themselves as reflections in the mirror as they identify what are their visible and invisible identities are. What's important to them in that stage of life as a third or fourth grader, and how those identities drive them to forward see to learn more about who they are as people as they continue to grow. These identity portraits that you see in the middle, students actually put inside of what we call an identity portfolio. And they carry this with them into other grades. And they will do the same activity in middle school and high school with the idea that they're transforming as people over the course of time. Their interests and identities, some of it may be the same, some of it may change, but they get to see that growth for who they are as people over the course of many years in their schooling. And over on the right, it also includes students having the opportunity to teach other kids. You see a picture here of my fourth grade students giving presentations to a set of first grade students, supporting them with understanding all about uh, extreme weather, learning about tornadoes and hurricanes and all those great things. And when you put all that stuff together, you have a student affirming education. Notice in each of these pictures is the student who's at the center, and it's the student who's leading in terms of inquiry, leading in terms of affirmation of their background, leading in terms of teaching and providing wisdom and knowledge to younger kids. So that way that work is being paid forward, not just in the classroom, but into the community space as well. So this is what we're doing every day. When we talk about ed, justice, and equity, many educators in this room, y'all doing the same thing every day. And so my props to you. We're going to keep doing that moving forward because now what we see is that affirmation is impacting our students positively.
Right. So the idea that we are insulated from the rise of anti-public education and anti-civil rights policies provides a false sense of security, I think, here in New England. In 2023, Vermont House Bill 513 was introduced. This was my first term in the State House, and I was completely caught off guard when the bill was introduced. It's an act relating to protecting the competitive integrity and safety of girls and women in sports. that proposed to prohibit individuals that were assigned the sex of male at birth from participating in an elementary, secondary, or post-secondary school athletic program or activity that's designed for girls or women. And while this bill obviously wasn't taken up by the House, where we have a Democratic supermajority, we lost that supermajority in this most recent election, and that's going to open the door for more anti-trans legislation. So we need to keep an eye on that for all our students. In addition, a dear friend and former teacher of mine sent me a copy of the local newspaper from my hometown, which is actually in New Hampshire, where Heidi teaches. And there it was, an article about a book being stripped from the curriculum because of a parent complaint. When this type of thing happens, it's precedent setting. It's precedent setting. There must be legislation that puts policy in place for reviewing text in our public schools. Legislation that protects our librarians, protects our educators and our administrators, and really protects our students by providing them the opportunity for their identities to be affirmed and open doors to learning, both about themselves and others.
Okay, I'm off mute this time. What we have here are just some statistics, all based in research, but I think that it's pretty powerful. And when I spoke earlier about how it can feel very isolating when you see this kind of negative policy or these educator gag orders or anti-public ed policies coming out, it makes you question. I can speak for myself. It makes me question, maybe I am in the minority. And then when you look here, you realize that that's not the case. The truth is that 4 in 5 Americans, regardless of their party affiliation, believe that schools should teach about cultures, identities, and perspectives or whatnot that are different from their own, which is the opposite of what a lot of these policies that we see coming out are doing. 69% of Americans and 68% of parents don't feel that laws banning books and curriculum are being driven by politicians. So what Kate just spoke of happening in New Hampshire and happening everywhere, honestly, is that that's political driven. That's not what's in the best interest of our students, and that's not what's happening. That's not what families want. And then again, I mean, these are huge statistics. 72% of Americans believe that politicians shouldn't have any big influence on what is taught in our classrooms. What happens in our classroom is a local decision, and developed by educators, by people who are deeply ensconced in what is happening in those communities. And there are already policies and curriculum and whatnot in place in every school district that have been made in the best interest of children. And they can change and adjust and be modified, but politicians have no place in making those decisions. And 91% of Americans agree that political groups, oh my gosh, I can't even read that small font. That they shouldn't have meaningful input is the same thing. And we're starting to see other states across the country respond to this through like Illinois and New Jersey today just came out and signed a law prohibiting book banning. And so we are starting to see that come out, but it seems that the direction that we're moving in is that it's in addition to speaking out against these anti-public education legislation, is that we also, how can we advocate back towards it in advocating legislation that pushes back and prevents it? So it is scary stuff that we see happening, but we can be rest assured that the majority of people don't like what they're seeing. And then these graphics here are really great. I think Tracy's going to put a link to where they come from the folks at Rally, who are huge public education supporters. These are actually that you can grab and include on your own social media. But why are we doing this? Because we believe in our teachers. We believe in public education. We believe kids matter more than politics. Politics change. Kids still come to school every day, right? And that we believe in the freedom to learn, and that when we phrase it in those positive ways, it also, again, tells our students that we care about them and that we are advocating for them because they are what matter, not the politicians. Hold on, that's me again. I just had to shift. So this is all very well and good, right? Us talking about this and saying what we care about, but that's just as problematic when you're not backed up by research as folks from the other side saying what they care about. But time and time again, research that Tracy is gonna link in the chat supports that these kinds of policies, education justice in general, but student affirming practices improve everything across the board for the student experience in school and for the educator's experience in school. But student attendance, grade point average, completing courses, their student assessments, both summative, formative, and standardized. It improves their ability to be critical thinkers because of exactly what Deshawn was saying, that when we teach them how to be thinkers and how to find the truth or understand what truth is, then they're better equipped to be able to do that. That's not surprising to any of us, but it's even more powerful to see that it's backed in the research. And it also, not surprisingly, improves student behavior. And I would make the argument that that's because when you're attending school and you feel welcomed and you feel as though you can be successful, you're also going to be better behaved because you feel as though you have a place and that you belong. Which also is tied to improved outcomes for engagement, motivation, and just their self-perception of who they are as students. We believe in them, but they need to believe in themselves too. And this research shows that when we support them through these policies, what we know to be true happens.
That's a word, Heidi. And so now we're going to go into thinking about how that research applies now in practical application. We'll take a look at some ethics studies and how that's impacted. We'll also talk a little bit about getting involved, how you can stay involved and stay alert in this work. And then we'll talk about some teacher diversity work that's going on across New England. So according to some research, there was a particular school that was providing Mexican American studies courses for students to take. And they found that students who were engaging in this Mexican American studies class, in which they were engaged in that work, not only did they produce better outcomes when it came to standardized testing and reading and writing and mathematics, but they also were more involved in their schooling. They also have a higher graduation rate. In other words, they were intrinsically motivated to come to school every day because students began to see themselves as part of the academic learning. They was taking courses about their history, for their history, by people who were part of their cultural background. And so further research shows that when students are able to take classes that's related to their lived experiences or related to their culture, we see 21 percentage point increase in terms of attendance. We see that GPAs are going up as well. Kids are going from C's to B's, B's to A's, A's to A pluses, with that increase going up by 1.4 grade points, and credits earned going up by 23 points. So we're seeing that kids are taking more classes that is engaging towards their cultural identity and diversity. And here's some research that says research shows that allowing students to honestly discuss race and racism reduces prejudice among students at all ethnic and racial backgrounds. In other words, we need to have this conversation. And it has to actually start at the earlier grades. It needs to start in kindergarten, go all the way up through the 12th grade. It needs to be something that's a continual conversation. I know it could be a sticky conversation for some educators, but this is a conversation that's needed because we're trying to prepare our students again, going back to that education justice piece, we're trying to prepare students to become upstanding citizens. And in order to do that, we need to equip them with what they need in order to engage in the world so that way they can engage in legislation, engage in policy, become teachers like we are today, become advocates of this great profession. So that leads us to this next point about how you could get involved as a stakeholder. You know, as a stakeholder, one of the great things about this work is that you have an opportunity to lend your voice. I love to say that teachers are experts in the field of education. We're the ones that's actually in the classrooms. We're the ones that's using curriculum. We're the ones that's building relationships with students every day. We're the ones that are driving the outcomes of the students that we're serving every day. So there's some things that you can do. Number one is get involved with sign up with a coalition. I just signed up with the Center for Development of Black Education, and I signed up for the coalition to now be involved with what they're doing to add more Black teachers in the profession. So find a coalition that's meaningful for you, that fits your needs, that fits your passion, and sign up and get those weekly, bi-weekly, monthly newsletters. Figure out a way to be a volunteer and get engage in some of the work that's being done. This is a relationship work. Continue to speak the truth. That includes using social media, your X account and your Facebook and your LinkedIn and YouTube and whatever other accounts that you use to speak about public education, to speak about your students, to speak about teachers in your community, engaging with other people on social media to advocate for justice. Track legislation. I'm just putting it in the chat right now a link where you could track the legislation season session dates across all 50 states, and that includes the states that are here tonight. Many start in either in December or in early January, right after the new year. So this is a great opportunity to be right involved in what's the next legislation. Proposed bills are going to be, what the next ideas are going to be, and be involved in that conversation early, so we're not caught off guard if some new bill comes out and we disagree with it, but we weren't well known. I'll also say this, even being involved in school committee and unions are very important as well. These resources we're actually paying in terms of the union. And so we need to know what our local school district is actually doing on a day-to-day basis, monthly basis, and keeping track of that work as well. Staying involved, being able to write to your policymakers, and leveraging students to be able to write to policymakers as well. Storytelling, it's still the best way in order to make a convincing argument about justice and equity. And when a policymaker reads a note that comes from a 7-year-old that speaks on that element of identity, it hits a little different than an adult. So just want to also name that there are students who are also engaging in this work as well, and creating opportunities for that is essential. And last but not least, we are educators. So we are experts in this field. We deserve to be at that seat at the table. And that means that we have to be involved in those coalitions. That means we have to be speaking out when we see injustice in education. And that means that we have to also engage in legislation, which leads us to different ed topics and equity topics to look for. While I'm not going to go through every single one of these topics, I will say that it's important for you to think about what is most valuable for you. In Massachusetts right now, there's a big discussion about literacy curriculum, and school districts are being mandated by DESE and mandated by the state to select curriculum that's evidence-based in order to do literacy and reading and writing. And so some districts are in disagreements with that and having conversations right now with DESE about that mandate, about moving towards an evidence-based system. Because research has shown from other states like Tennessee, for example, that even though those states have moved from choosing their own curriculum to moving to an evidence-based or science of reading curriculum, it has not made impacts to Black and Brown students from advancing in their reading. In fact, in Tennessee, it's still about 70% of Black and Brown students are still not passing the grade level reading assessment. This is after multiple years of switching over to evidence-based reading. So there's concerns that this evidence-based reading is not moving the needle, and instead we need to be moving the needle of supporting and training our teachers to be even more effective to support those students who are in the highest need. All right, you go to the next slide. All right, so here we're going to talk a little bit next about teacher diversity and what does that look like in across the 6 New England states. In Massachusetts, you'll find that there's a large gap. About 46% of all of our students in the state of Massachusetts are students of color, yet only 10% of all the teachers in Massachusetts are a teacher of color. In other words, it's a 36% percentage gap between students of color and teachers of color. And that's a larger gap than the average in New England, and that's a larger gap than in the United States as well. We also find that when we look at teacher diversity in Massachusetts, that 29% of schools in Massachusetts do not have a single teacher of color. In other words, about 3 out of every 10 schools does not have a teacher of color, not Black, Latino, Asian, not any type of teacher of color in the school environment. And also in Massachusetts, you can move on to the next slide. And in Massachusetts, we see that about 43% of all the schools, of all the teachers of color, are really conjugated into three cities: Boston, Worcester, and Springfield. And so when you really think about what's happening here, we have an exponential increase. We're seeing more and more students of color coming into Massachusetts. And yet either the teachers are being conjugated really into the three main cities in Massachusetts and not being sprinkled out throughout, or in some cases that we just don't have a single teacher of color at all in some of these districts. And so that is concerning. And that's concerning to the experiences of kids that's being in those schools. And it's also concerning to the well-being of those students and concern to the experiences of what teachers of color could bring to the table and service in our classroom communities. We go into Rhode Island, same scenario as we just saw in Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, we also see that there's a large gap. We have about almost half of all of our students in Rhode Island are students of color, and yet only 8% of teachers are teachers of color. So again, larger than New England average and larger than the gap in the United States. This is one of the largest gaps in the entire country. And it's really appalling to really see this gap in a representation of a graph. And so when you go down and take a look in Rhode Island, again, just like in Massachusetts, 29%, almost 30% of Rhode Island schools do not have a single teacher of color. Just think about that. And when you really start thinking about this, it's really alarming to think that a student can go to 12 years and not have any sort of teacher of color that they experience at any of their schools that they go to. That's concerning. 50% of all teachers of color in the state of Rhode Island are conjugated in Providence, Rhode Island. A few more in Pawtucket. And that's about 60% of all teachers of colors in those two cities in Rhode Island. We could go down to the next slide. Kate, do you want to talk a little bit about Vermont?
Sure. I was looking at the percentages, but wanted to dig a little deeper into the raw numbers because I think they're shocking, at least to me that they are. Vermont has over 9,000 students of color, which doesn't seem like a lot if you're in Massachusetts or a bigger state than what we have, but 9,000 students of color here in Vermont and only 104 teachers of color. 104. Vermont has 10% fewer educators now than we did before the pandemic. That's the second worst decline in the nation. Vermont principals have, out of necessity, needed to hire teachers with fewer qualifications. And we have these mounting state challenges to the educator diversity efforts as well. One of those being the complete lack of leadership from the Agency of Education. You don't have to go too far in a Google search to figure out what's happening there. And also we have the second highest rate of unhoused people per capita in the nation. Vermont's crisis is getting worse. We experienced an 18.5% increase in unhoused people between 2022 and 2023. And because of our country's long history of racist and unfair laws and policies, Black Vermonters are unhoused at a staggering rate compared to white Vermonters. Black people represent just 1.4% of Vermont's population, and yet they account for over 8% of Vermont's unhoused population. So what's happening over in Connecticut? What we know is that children of all racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds benefit when we have access to diverse teachers and school leaders. Yet just 1 in 10 educators are people of color today in Connecticut, compared to more than half of Connecticut's school children. If we look at the next slide, Connecticut has made great strides. In 2016, the legislature required Connecticut school districts to increase teacher diversity. In addition to this mandate, the state focused staff, finances, and partners on helping school districts and institutions of higher education achieve this goal. Connecticut invested in scholarships, a teacher residency program, paid apprenticeships, and localized recruitment and training partnerships involving community organizations and teacher preparation programs that were designed to cultivate diverse future teachers. The state also created an educator diversity dashboard, which I'd like to see in Vermont, a publicly available online platform that allows visitors to track relative progress and drive improvements across districts on numbers of educators of color as compared to numbers of students of color. In addition, 11 Connecticut school districts volunteered to have teams of district leaders evaluate the actions their districts were taking to diversify the workforce. And over a 2-year period beginning in 2020-2021 school year, nearly all the participating districts achieved overall net gains in the numbers of educators of color. So Connecticut is stepping up their game since 2016. They're toeing the line, they're creating the partnerships, they're knocking down the barriers, and they're seeing good results. So that's good to see.
You want me to chime in about New Hampshire? I mean, very similar to our other New England states, except I'll add that the fact that if you look at that section on the left there, only 1% of are teachers of color. And that I feel as though I was in a conversation with a student the other day who also engages in some political advocacy. And she is a student of color. And she shared that one of the reasons that it means so much to her to see teachers of color would be because when she sees people of color working in a school, they are most often custodians and working in the cafeteria. And that really took me by surprise, the way that she phrased it, because she's right. And the data supports that. And so it's not just about checking boxes. It's not just about, trying to make ourselves look, like we're inclusive. It's because of exactly what that student said to me, that, and that just perpetuates all of the systemic racism that we see in our country. When the only people of color working in a school are a custodian or work in a cafeteria, what does that say to our students of color? And so, and then if we look at the main slide, it is, I feel like by the time we've gotten to my slides here at the end, it's very similar to what has been repeated in other states. But the idea that this should be something, when we think about education justice, it's not just about what we teach or don't teach in our classrooms, and it's not just about what we are or are not allowed to say, or how we support students. It's also about how can we diversify our profession, because that's also matters for our students. And also, how can we encourage our students of color to see themselves as teachers? And I'm not sure that's a question that people are asking all of the time. Okay, so we are going to each talk about 2 states each. We, for those of you who are joining us tonight, the 3 of us, Deshawn, Kate, and I are Empowered Educator Fellows, and we are assigned to 2 New England states, and our job is this coalition building and learning as much as we can about our states. And so we each have a home state, and then we have a new state to us. So my home state is New Hampshire, so I'm apologizing in advance to Maine, because I obviously know a lot more about New Hampshire at this time. But something really wonderful I wanted to share, like a positive coming out of Maine, and that I think that a lot of other states should to look for, is that they are really concerned about their their educator, the long-term effects of do they have an educator shortage or not, and declining people entering the profession and just finding educators. And part of that, or much of that, is because Maine has so many rural communities, and that we know, regardless of the state, that those are harder to fill because they're often less they often pay less, have fewer resources, and people tend to move away from those communities when they grow up in them. And I just mean that in general, not specific to Maine. But and if you look at this graph on the chart on the far right, you can see the distribution of teachers in Maine completely matches their metropolitan areas, and there's a higher concentration in their cities. But you can also see with this other graph that their number of educators in Maine has been declining over the last 10 years. And one of the big primary concerns that is coming out is because the concerns of the costs of teaching. And so Maine, this wonderful organization called Educate Maine, and also with the Teach Maine Center and the Maine Policy Institute, did a deep dive into some study research about this, and I'm going to stick it in the chat. But talking to teachers about all of these issues and finding out why and finding answers. And so I feel as though Maine is a state that we should look to for when we think about our profession. How do we go about, instead of continually talking about how we don't have enough teachers? Marcus, all right, the Maine Policy Institute, we can get rid of that one off of there. So when we look to how can we go about thinking about considering, because I really bothered by the term a teacher shortage. We don't have a teacher shortage. We have a shortage of people who are willing to go into the profession because of the barriers and systems that are in place that are making it impossible to stay in the profession. And so I think that when we ask questions in that regard, we should I'm sorry to my Maine friends, that we should think about it in that way. We don't have a teacher shortage. There are lots of people who want to be teachers or who already are teachers, but they've made either a conscious decision or they're making a conscious decision to not go into it. Okay, and we'll take the Teach Maine Center off of there. Tracy, can you go in the slides and just take it off the but Educate Maine and the Maine and sorry, hold on, I just want to make sure I pick the right one. Which one are we taking off? The Maine Policy Institute, but the Teach Maine Center is good. Okay, so I confused myself there. Sorry, keep Teach Maine. And I put the link to the most recent, and when I'm not talking, I'll add a better link in there, but Educator Workforce in Maine. So, that is what I have to say about Maine. And then New Hampshire is where I'm from. And it is a depressing landscape right now. And I think Tracy's doing that right now. It's a depressing landscape right now because it is just a bastion of anti-public education coming out of the legislature. In fact, that the number of bills that have been introduced over the last few years has exploded so much that the education committee in the legislature actually has decided this year that they're going to divide themselves in half, and some are going to focus on policy and some are going to focus on funding issues, because there were so many coming in that they couldn't manage all of it. And so when you're thinking, if you're looking to New Hampshire and you're wondering what is your best way to go about advocating, I would say, what bucket do you want to consider? Think of the bucket of whatever matters for you, because there's so many. This year there's continued anti-LGBTQ legislation coming in. There is continued Parents' Bill of Rights. There is continued universal voucher expansions. In fact, there's a bill that's being proposed that would be a local school voucher, which would be the first of its kind, and it's in the nation. There's also continued efforts to change the definition of what an adequate education is. And why are they doing that? Because there's a current lawsuit in New Hampshire. It's the third or fourth time in the last 30 years, I've lost track, that the state has been sued by property poor school districts for not providing an adequate education. And the way that the Department of Education has responded to this is that they have completely rewritten all of the minimum standards for education, so that technically their goal is that they won't be found out of compliance, because if an adequate education doesn't include anything that we have to pay for, then we don't need to worry about this lawsuit. So there's so many. Just today, the attorneys for the state, because it's gone to the Supreme Court, were arguing that for an adequate education, you don't need heat. You don't need transportation, and you don't need principals and superintendents. And so it is just sort of horrifying to see that at a state Supreme Court and how they are arguing. So anyway, my point with New Hampshire, I've yammered on long enough, let my colleagues go, is that pick your passion, I would say, and devote your advocacy energy, because otherwise you're going to burn out, because it is relentless in New Hampshire. Someone said to me yesterday, it's all bad. Really great organizations to get involved in. Reaching Higher New Hampshire, that's who I'm the vice president of the executive board. The New Hampshire School Funding Fairness organization is doing remarkable messaging right now on funding and inequity in funding, because in New Hampshire we fund our schools mostly through local property tax dollars. We don't have a state income tax or sales tax. And then Granite State Progress is just a general progressive education. You can find a lot of good stuff in there too. And then I know Tracy put it in the chat, the Great Schools Partnership is New England wide, but operating a lot in my neck of the woods. So that's all. Maine folks, I'm apologizing for putting the wrong link in there. I'm sorry. I'm still learning. All right, I'm passing it off.
All right, so in Connecticut, we do know that all students, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, or geography, should have access to a high-quality education that provides them with the skills, knowledge, and competencies needed to be successful. Look for Connecticut to start examining school funding formulas that ensure that Connecticut is directing resources equitably and tied to student need. Look for the legislation to make the pathway to teaching more accessible, to help combat the chronic staff shortages and increase teacher diversity. Look to the governor to redirect tens of millions of dollars from K-12 districts to early childhood education. This is a reverse of his commitment he made during last year's legislative session. The legislature will likely take another look at last year's bill that changed the kindergarten entry cutoff from January to September. There's been some pushback, pretty fierce backlash from parents and advocates who say that that measure will actually strain families who have to pay for an extra year of pre-K or childcare. And also, following the US Supreme Court's decision last year to ban race-based affirmative action, top lawmakers in Connecticut have turned their attention to another form of preference, legacy admissions. A bill to block public and private universities from giving preference to students whose family members have attended there is expected to have wide support. As of this moment, no state has banned legacy admissions, though a bill that would do so in Virginia awaits the governor's signature there. So we will go on to Vermont. The House Democrats, of which I am one, met this past Saturday to elect our leadership and strategize around our top priorities that will include the future of public education and how we fund it, as well as housing. Session is set to begin on January 8th and generally looks to conclude early to mid-May. As we struggle in Vermont over how to meet our constitutional obligation, guaranteeing the right to public education and our responsibility to ensure that all children have access to a quality education at a price all Vermonters can afford, tough decisions will be made. I urge those with us from Vermont to stay tuned into this work that the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont is doing. Nothing is off the table. We know that we spend less than our neighboring states on instruction and instructional practices, even though those are the things that make the biggest outcomes for learning. And we also know that we spend more than our neighbors on administrative costs. So this could likely mean fewer districts, not to shock some of you. It could mean one district for our state. It likely means closing some of the smaller schools unless we can find a way to leverage federal funding and or get creative. The community schools model is a good one to look at, and I'm hopeful for that work.
All right. right, and we'll wrap up with the last two states, Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I want to thank all of you who are coming out tonight. Thank you so much for just taking a moment to talk about educational justice and equity across New England. Thank you so much to Kate and Heidi for sharing the wisdom and knowledge that's going on in Connecticut and Vermont and Maine and New Hampshire. Thank you, Tracy, for hosting this tonight. And thank you for anyone that's watching this video. Thank you for tuning in to us tonight. Our last two states, we'll start with Massachusetts. The legislative session is going to begin right after the new year in January 8th, 2025, and we'll go all the way through right around Thanksgiving time, 2025. Some coalitions I think that you should consider joining the Massachusetts Education Justice Alliance. This is an alliance that focuses on educational justice and in particular teacher pay, making sure that sick time is used, making sure that, for example, teachers that need to take parental leave are able to do so, not have to eat out their sick pay, and other justice work like that. The New Teacher Project, which is housed in the Boston area, does a lot of research on educational justice and supporting new teachers to come into the profession. The Latinos for Education is a great affinity group and a great group to support when it comes to building up more teachers of color. And they focus specifically on Latinos, but they also focus on teachers of color as a whole. And the Black Educators Alliance in Massachusetts is a very similar group for Latinos for education, but this one focuses more on Black teachers. Some legislation to consider. I'm actually working on crafting some legislation right now. I don't really know how to do it, but I'm learning how to do it. CTE in teaching. And so I was at a conference a week ago. It was the 1 Million Teachers of Color conference, the New England Summit. And they talked about this CTE in teaching in Pennsylvania. And so what they did was it was a school, and this school is providing CTE courses for the high school students to gain teaching experience at the high school level. And so what they were doing was that those high school students were able to get tutoring and able to get other coursework to be done in teaching, and then they would earn credit, and then that credit they was earning, they would move over to the city of Philadelphia, which is the community college, to gain more opportunities to practice the field of profession. Meanwhile, get paid as part of their experience as a paraprofessional or a paraeducator or a teacher who's going through their teacher practicum, and then go over to Temple University to then gain more experience. And then by the time that they graduate from Temple University, they have a wealth of years of experience that they would then be able to use to go into the classroom and begin teaching. And I begin to think to myself, well, why not have something like that here in Massachusetts? As of right now, there is no CTE courses being offered for high school students in Massachusetts, specifically in teaching. And yet there's a call of action to get more young folks into teaching. Because believe it or not, I spoke to a lot of young people here in Massachusetts. They want to become teachers. They want to be that teacher that they were inspired by from their teacher that they had in younger grades, to be able to go back and give to the teaching profession. And yet opportunities to engage even as early as high school is not available for those young folks. So we want to create some legislation that's going to allow for CTE courses to be able to be taken in teaching and allow for young people to begin that work. And so my vision is that we will have CTE in high school with experiences that kids were able to earn money by taking courses and be able to gain experience and gain credit, go to a local community college like Roxbury Community College or Bunker Hill Community College to continue their work in education, and then transfer that to one of the UMass um, schools, UMass Boston, UMass Amherst, what have you, to finish out their degree. And in that way, that we're given that 5-year period of a plethora of different teaching experiences that young people will have in order to confirm that the call of action to be a teacher is to be done. So I'm working on something right now for that, and I definitely want that to be done in a more effective way. The other legislation to look out for in the state of Massachusetts is an act for equitable educator pay, and this goes not only to teacher pay, but the real controversy about parental and material leave. In many districts here in Massachusetts, that's taken out of your sick time. All right. So if you decide that you and your family wants to have a child and begin having a family, you're taking out 6 weeks, maybe 12 weeks of sick time. And this sick time, I can't go to Kate and ask Kate, hey, can I get 20 sick days to use in order to take more material? No, you don't even get an opportunity to exchange that type of sick time. You have to use what's available. And if you don't have anything, tough break, you're not getting paid. So we're working on this act of equitable educator pay, specifically when we think about families that are starting up, having children, and taking that leave of absence time in order to have their children. Lastly, Rhode Island, I want you to be very mindful. One of the types of legislations that we're seeing in the state of Rhode Island right now is the Parent Rights Act. Be careful. The Parents' Right Act is an act in which parents are able to evaluate the curriculum that's being used across Rhode Island public schools. And if they don't like what they see, they can sue. And we need to be careful about this. This is not only, while it may be painting the picture that we're empowering parents to be involved in public education. And we do want, by the way, parents to be involved in public education. We do want parents to stand for justice in public education. The language of this act is really to dethrone the educator and to take down the curriculum that's being used, specifically when we start talking about identity, diversity, and equity and inclusion, these type of terms that are being slowly removed in many states. And be careful, this is something that they're trying to do here in Rhode Island as well, so pay close attention to that Parents Rights Act. It is making its way in 2025, so be careful with that one. And we're also talking about teacher recruiting opportunities, and this really stems from an article where Rhode Island's really trying to consider, how do we get more teachers into the profession. There was an article that was written very recently about how a charter school has actually built their whole school around to support young people to become educators. And so the school is really set up to be almost like a CTE network, that those students that go into that particular charter school, that they're actually gaining experience and teaching and becoming educators in that way. One coalition I think you should join if you're considering Rhode Island or you're in Rhode Island is the Coalition for Children's and Families. I love this coalition because it's built for children, is made by children. So the advocates that are in this coalition are actually young people. Excuse me, that's the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition. Excuse me, the Rhode Island Civic Coalition. I love this group because it's actually led by children. It's led by middle school and high school students. They learn how to engage in legislation. They learn how to engage in policy, and they're trained over a course of many years to learn about the civic duties and learn about how civics is actually part of policy and lawmaking. And they actually are ran by children to stand at the state house. So this is a really good coalition if you want to hear from a children's perspective how children view policy and legislation in the field of education. Also consider the Education Collective and the Coalition for Children and Families. And that will lead it up to the end of this presentation. We don't want to take any more time, but we know we're going to pass it back to Tracy for final thoughts.
All right. And we do have one question from Dolly. I'm going to pop it into the chat for you. Panelists, a key item on the Educate Maine policy agenda is improved data collection. In particular, demographics, teacher gender and race and ethnicity. Do your states gather this data?
Vermont does not gather data on race. I believe that they do on gender. After going to the 1 Million Teachers of Color conference with Deshawn last week or the week before, it became obvious to me that we need to start tracking that data. And I'm wondering where we can work that in here in Vermont, because as I said, one of our biggest challenges is the lack of leadership at our agency of education. And so one of the my takeaways from the 1 Million Teachers of Color conference was that we could bypass maybe the agency of ed and use some sort of higher learning, maybe the University of Vermont. Maybe there's a group inside the University of Vermont that might want to help us gather that data and create a dashboard.
I would say similar in New Hampshire. We don't track as well as you do in Maine. An interesting and in the same so little support from our Department of Education. In fact, I saw our Commissioner of Education speak on a panel a few years ago, and the question was, what are you doing to increase teacher diversity? And his response was, well, it's really hard because there aren't any teachers of color that we can find or something. And I was like, that is not, that's first, there's a lot of layers there, but that's the vibe coming out of our Department of Ed. They say, well, there aren't any. Um, and that's just an unacceptable response in my mind, but similar. I like the idea, Kate, of going, circumventing the legislature and finding other ways to track it. Because I'm not the legislature too, but it doesn't need to come out of the Department of Education, this kind of tracking.
Absolutely. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat. And while we wait on that, you three are tremendous. Thank you so much for dedicating they're all classroom teachers, y'all. I can't even believe this. They are all three teaching in the classroom and also lending their talents and their platforms to helping support public education. I can tell you as a Georgian, in 2020, our state was promoting equity. We were all about social emotional learning. I feel like we were really, really just killing it down here. And it happened so fast. We saw the anti-critical race theory come, which meant bans on full history, followed by book banning and the Parents' Bill of Rights. And it has just gotten worse and worse and worse. It is a slippery slope. So I encourage you to stay engaged for sure.
I would say in New Hampshire too, it's happening very fast.
So fast.
And people don't realize parents and families really don't realize it's happening unless you really are cued in and that you understand the nuances of what it all means. And it's my fear is, the wrong people are going to wake up too late.
Absolutely. And that language is tricky, and they do it for a reason, right? They do it for a reason. I do see another question. Do teacher unions have demographic info? I wonder if that's a place we can look to for more information. And I will say we will be sharing, we'll have more webinars in the future and hopefully be joining some of the teacher unions in your states to collaborate and to get the truth out there so that we can keep supporting our kids. I have one more thing for you before you leave. Your voice matters. It absolutely matters. And so I'm going to pop a link to a Google Doc to where you can just kind of share what's been on your mind. It is very likely that there are some things happening in your school, in your district, in your state that we don't know about yet. So please share those with us, and we are happy to connect with you at a later time. We're happy to Zoom one-on-one as a group. You can already tell that these three are fantastic and personable and just really ready to roll up their sleeves and do the work. So I invite you to share your thoughts, share your insights about what's happening in your community and how we can help you support education justice. I'm going to pass it off to our fantastic trio to say adios.
I would close by echoing Deshaun earlier. He was talking about 7-year-olds writing letters to the legislature. There is nothing that we like better in the House Education Committee than testimony from children. So if you've got the means and the energy and the ability to get kids in front of their legislators, whether it's by inviting the legislators to the classroom or bringing the kids to us at the State House, that it makes such an impact, such an impact.
And I would say too, continuing that even though it feels overwhelming and that there's a lot of nasty out there, I think there's a lot of hope too. And that, like I said earlier in the webinar, that the majority of us and the majority of the parents and students and who we work with want us fighting for these things, and that there's a lot of hope.
And in closing, thank you. Thank you for the work that you are already doing in this field of education and the work that you're doing for our students, our families, our school communities. You are a pillar to this work of education, a pillar to the justice and equity and access that you give each day to our students. Please, we need you. in this work together. We need you at the legislation table. We need you standing outside the State House. We need you at the union meetings and the school committee meetings. And we need you at various different places. But make sure that you take care of yourself in this work, and make sure to remember to keep it a student-centered approach, because it's the students that we're called to serve in this field of education. Thank you for having us tonight, and thank you so much for staying with us.
All right, please look for this recording in your inbox in the coming days, and I will share a table with all those fantastic links for you. Have a beautiful night, and we'll see you at the next one.